Coming up, playoff rankings come out again tonight, and we'll find out if there are any surprises involving the SEC. We'll talk about it all next right here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to AT&T's SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johns. We got a busy show for you today. Coming up around 20 minutes from right now, we'll check in Auburn, Alabama with Benjamin Wolk, who covers Auburn and Auburn recruiting for SECCountry.com. We'll set the stage of the playoff announcement tonight as the top 25 comes out once again. A whole lot to get to, but if you don't mind, before we start today's show, can I ask you a quick question?
Oh, man. Here we go, man.
No, I just want to know, can I have your autograph?
No, man, here we go. I knew it was coming. He
didn't
bring that up the entire time leading up to the show, and I knew it was coming at the lead up.
All right, coming up in just a minute, we will get into the autograph scandal involving the 2009 national champions.
Scandal.
We'll do that in a minute. I kid. We'll do that in a moment. For now, though, let me remind you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless DirecTV, and you can stay connected all season long. Let's start off with our first and 10 here with item number 1 on our list. Before we get to 2009, let's deal with 2017, and that is the fact that for the second time this season, the College Football Playoff Selection Committee will come out with the top 25 again tonight. My expectation is when you look at the top between Georgia and Alabama, there will be no change here. Georgia should still be number 1. Alabama should still be number 2. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. I think it's going to prove again tonight that the road to the national championship will once again kind of come through the SEC.
Yeah, I think so. Now, for what it's worth, Kirby Smart is probably not worried about this. He hasn't been worried about the thing the entire time. In fact, on Saturday, Georgia clinched the SEC East, the fastest that's been done by any SEC team in either of the two divisions since 2009. But as of Monday, he still hadn't talked to his team about it yet. So that kind of gives you an idea of how he's viewing these college football playoff rankings. In fact, here's what he said Monday about that subject.
Well, I really haven't gotten together as a team since Saturday. So, all that broke out afterwards, and we've got team meetings and things today, but that's not been a major concern for us. Our concern has always been on the next opponent, and that's really where we are kind of now.
So Kirby not worried about this. I imagine Nick Saban's probably the same way. In fact, Saban has said similar things. But we obviously have plenty to be, if not worried about, at least interested in. And beyond Georgia and Alabama, they're at the 1 and 2 spots. You start looking at the other SEC teams.
Yeah.
Auburn, who was at number 14 last week, I expect them to be a big mover tonight. I expect Auburn to finish tonight's College Football Playoff Committee deliberations with a real legitimate shot of winning the national championship. Now, they'll have to win some big games to get there, but the committee's going to give them a chance tonight, I believe.
Yeah, they're definitely going to give them a chance. And I think that when you look at how Auburn's schedule stacks up, when you look at November, I mean, they have as good a chance as anybody to kind of backdoor and squeak into the college football playoff. And obviously, it's going to be an uphill battle anytime you're facing the number 1 and number 2 teams and kind of back-to-back home games, 2 weeks separated, then possibly having to play the number 1 team again when you get to the final stretch if Auburn does find a way to win those games. It's just tough, man. It's going to be a tough stretch for them, and I kind of like the way that Malzahn has entered this. I like the way that Kirby Smart's entering this game, and I don't expect any of the rankings to change tonight. When you look at the top 10, I do expect Auburn to squeak in there, though, with those both of those Big Ten teams exiting the top 10.
By the way, the comment section, Steve Ewing says, y'all know the Tide should be over Georgia. I mean, do you agree with that? Do you think Alabama should be ranked ahead of Georgia right now?
I don't have a problem with it either way. It's like I've kind of said on the show, neither one of those rankings matter. The AP has Bama at number 1, and obviously the College Football Playoff Committee has Georgia number 1. It doesn't matter. I know that it's kind of a rallying point for fans. Maybe it's a little bit bigger deal in recruiting, but I just don't see the problem with it. It's going to play itself out in the field, and if both teams keep winning, they'll see each other in Atlanta first week in December.
Carol Vicker says, Brandon, it's not Alabama's fault who they play. They do not make the football schedule. None of the teams make their own schedule. Well, to Carol's point, one of the other things I'm interested in seeing tonight is what the committee does with the other teams that were ranked last week.
Yeah.
Mississippi State, I assume, stays in the poll, even though they weren't all that impressive in beating UMass. That gives Alabama another chance for a top 25 win this Saturday. But LSU was ranked at 19th a week ago. Does LSU fall out of the poll after losing 24-10 to Alabama? Does LSU stay in, giving the Tide another one of those what we think of as sort of coveted wins against playoff top 25 teams?
Yeah.
I do think that's going to be an interesting thing to watch from the committee tonight.
I think it is too. I think that maybe they hang on at the tail end of the top 25. You stick them right there at 23 or 24. You've seen teams not be discounted a ton for losing to top 4 teams in these past few weeks. The College Football Playoff takes that into effect when they do lay out these teams. I think that LSU finds a way to squeeze in, and they'll continue the roll on down the end of their schedule as a top 25 team.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me move on here to number 2 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. If you want to play playoff rankings and where you think Georgia and Alabama belong. You can continue to do that throughout the day. I'm sure we'll continue to react to that as we speak to the comments on AT&T's SEC Country Live. But for now, let's touch on the subject that we joked about before, and I am going to joke about this because I don't think this is a serious issue. There was the SI.com report that some 2009 Alabama players had received some improper benefits, money in way of exchange for autographs. The biggest name, I guess, connected to this was Terrance Cody, the guy known as Mount Cody from that 2009 team, who I think famously blocked the field goal against Tennessee in 2009, a play that we actually talked about on this show not all that long ago. Now, this is interesting for us in this show because you also played on that team. So before I give any of my opinions on this, share with me your thought about hearing your team mentioned for a story like this.
Well, I had a couple of different emotions. When I first saw the headline, I was angry. I was angry that, I thought that a couple of my teammates had obviously put what we had done that year online. All that hard work and sacrifice that goes into it. We're getting all the way before we're about to play in the Rose Bowl game for the national title, and then, supposedly, allegedly, a couple of guys are taking $20 bills from in a parking lot. It kind of made me angry when I first heard the headline. And then I go in to read the story, and I'm starting to read it, and I realize this guy, is in jail. This is an ex-convict guy who was a forger. And I'm sitting there going, I don't know who to believe. Terrance Cody's come out and said he didn't do it. Marquise Johnson's come out and said that they didn't do it. I'm not sure who to believe in all the circumstances. I want to err on the side of caution and believe my old teammates, but you're talking about something that happened probably a week before Christmas, and I just don't know. I don't know. You
use a word there that I find to be kind of interesting. You used the word angry. If you did find out that, and the name that's out there is Terrance Cody, so let's just use him as for instance. If you found out that he received money for an autograph, we're not talking about tens of thousands of dollars, we're talking about a few $100s here. Yeah. At least that's the basis of the report. You would actually be angry with him for doing that?
Well, I think you have to look at it and try to understand his circumstances. First of all, a lot of the players I played with had an incredibly different socioeconomic background than I do. So leading up to Christmas, it's hard to fault a guy. But then you do look at it and say, I'm a guy who's been playing by the rules the whole time. I don't have any money. I'm not going down there eating delicious 5-star meals at any restaurant in Tuscaloosa or going somewhere else with a pocket full of money. So that does bring a little sense of anger. When you look at some of the situations that have happened around college football, specifically with Reggie Bush, I mean, they pulled away his Heisman, they pulled away USC's national title, and for somebody to do that,
his parents got a house.
Well, I know.
That's a little different.
Well, that's what I'm saying. When I read the headline, I was kind of angry. But then when you read down the story, and listen, come on now. I mean, we're talking about the unpaid parking ticket of rule violations.
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
I obviously can't speak to this from the perspective of an ex-player, but I can speak to this from the perspective of a fan. And my favorite team, Georgia, was connected to a similar story like this in 2014 when Todd Gurley got a 4-game suspension for his connection to a memorabilia dealer. I got to tell you, at the time, I thought that was ludicrous. Georgia suspending this guy as opposed to fighting these charges, I thought was the wrong thing to do. It did not make me mad that Gurley, who was a great player, might have traded on his name for a little bit of money. And I say that for my own favorite team, and I say this for your team as well, that if I found out that a 2009 Alabama player traded a signature for money, that just feels like capitalism to me. It doesn't feel like any kind of scandal, any kind of broken law. And listen, there's nobody that would love to sort of, rip you for this more than me. But in this case, I don't think this is a big deal.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I think what's interesting to look at, too, is almost all the guys that have alleged to have done this in that parking lot today, if you wait 2 weeks, you can do it legally. I mean, if you wait 2 or 3 weeks and all of a sudden, Terrance Cody's graduated, Marquise Johnson's graduated, it's not a big deal. And it is kind of ludicrous to look at it. This guy is saying he handed players $20 bills, and a couple of $20 bills out in a parking lot. Honestly, once I was done reading it all, I was angry with Sports Illustrated. Here's a big feature story about a con artist, a guy that's in jail and has conned people out of millions of dollars. And the tweet that you put out, and the only headline you see is about Alabama players 8 years ago supposedly taking a couple $100. And that just, to me, that goes to show you what some of these media outlets are doing these days.
The quarterback on the Alabama team is Greg McElroy, who's a college football analyst now for the SEC Network and ESPN. He's also connected to the story, and then it was reported that he signed some autographs but didn't take money for those autographs. And today, McElroy made an appearance on his ESPNU radio show, kind of defended himself and to a certain extent defended his team as well, or his former team. Here's what McElroy had to say.
Never took $1 for anything. Ever. Never once. And I know people are trying to make a huge deal of this. I can't speak on behalf of Marquise Johnson or Terrance Cody. One of the guys that was listed, I don't even know who he is. Rod Woodson. I honestly don't even know. He might have been on the team. I don't know. So, I mean, it's a story that obviously is going to garner some steam, understandably so, but it's just not really all that uncommon to sign a bunch of things over the course of the season.
Yeah, so that's what McElroy says. And I don't know why you got to put Rod Woodson's name out there like that. Can we not give the guy credit for being on the team? I mean, this guy's claim to fame in life was that he played on the 2009 Alabama team. And you got the quarterback of the team, McElroy, going in ESPN radio saying, I don't even remember the guy. I mean, even if you don't, how about you keep that part of the story to yourself?
Yeah, there's definitely a hint of arrogance there when you talk about you don't even remember a guy that was on your football team. But it is interesting, and I kind of agree with a lot of what Greg McElroy had to say in a lot of these instances where you look at it and you're like, I don't even know how to react. I didn't take any money for anything, and allegedly these couple of guys did. I mean, a week before Christmas, I don't know what all the circumstances was, and the guy who's telling the story is in jail for being, for conning people out of millions of dollars. I don't know who to believe.
I'm going to get a ruling here, need a ruling from you on this. Chris McLeod says, boy, these media people love rat poison going back to 2009. Don't we have to correct Chris on this? Isn't this technically the opposite of rat poison? I mean, didn't Saban set up rat poison as the media saying all this good stuff about you? So if they're saying that your 2009 team got improper benefits, this technically is the opposite of rat poison.
Yeah, this is not rat poison. This is somebody trying to tear down what your accomplishments were. And I think that's another angle to look at, too, when you talk about the whole story. This didn't benefit anybody on the football field. And if it happened a week before the national title game, it wasn't going to change anything anyways. And so I've dealt with this from all angles. Man, I've gotten a ton of questions the last couple of days about this. I've had interview inquiries and everything, and you name it. And I don't really know what angle to attack it at. All I know is that I didn't take any money, and I don't know if I so much mind if the other guys did. I mean, it's definitely a bad look, but I mean, we're talking about 2040.
And that's the thing. That's really the kind of the final point for me on this whole issue is we are in 2017 in a time where you'd be hard-pressed to find any people. Now, it's one thing if you're a rival and you just want to sort of like take a jab at your other rival. That's one thing. But as far as objective analysis goes, you'd be hard-pressed to find very many people that even care that players got money for autographs. Yeah. Most people would say they ought to be getting some money for something because they're putting their life on the line out there in the football.
Yeah, most of the people that I have talked to or at least encountered on Twitter are definitely down on it because of a rival score or something like that. But the bottom line is here, I don't know if any school in the SEC, save for maybe Vanderbilt and a couple of the other ones, can really, cast stones at anything that's been happening in Alabama. When you look at, Ole Miss and Auburn's had their share of troubles, and we were talking about LSU maybe offering $65,000 to a recruit a couple of weeks ago.
I think it's more than that.
It's it's tough, and it sucks to have to defend yourself because of a couple of teammates 8 years ago. I guess.
Zach Black, this is final comment. He says they just hating on Alabama because they've been the most dominant team in almost a decade. That's true. I mean, you can't get a green light on a story about something that happened in 2009 unless it happened in Alabama, and that's just a fact. And some of y'all call me an Alabama hater, but I'm going to tell you right now, that's a fact. You could not get this story printed about anybody else but Alabama.
Well, and the one thing you have to know too is if this was really groundbreaking, if this was some kind of big, huge story that was going to come out, and this was a huge news story, they wouldn't have waited till this big story printed. This would have come out a long time ago as soon as the reporter heard about it. Yeah. So now you're waiting for this feature story to come out, and it's about all this stuff other than Alabama, but that one excerpt is what Sports Illustrated has obviously decided to push.
Let me do item number 3 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. How about this? As we set up for the Georgia-Auburn game on Saturday, a little bit of evidence here of just how significant this game is going to be from Auburn. I found this blurb in a piece by Jerry Hennon at SECCountry.com to be pretty fascinating. Hennon writes, stakes for this Saturday have been steadily building ever since November 1st, 2014, when the Tigers defeated Ole Miss for their most recent victory over any top 15 team. Yeah. How is that possible that Auburn, one of the biggest brands in all of college football, could go 3 years without beating a top 15 team? And my goodness, does that not put extra pressure on this Saturday against Georgia?
I think it does. And listen, you and I have talked about Gus Malzahn a couple times this year. He has to get over this hump of this Georgia-Alabama hump. And this year just happens to be the year it looks like it's going to be the hardest to do it in terms of how long Gus Malzahn's been there as a head coach. I remember that game when they beat Ole Miss. I think the score was 35-31, and I think Ole Miss was top 4 team in the country, and that kind of knocked them out of the loop as far as college football playoff goes. But
and those players are getting a lot more than money for autographs, by the way.
Yeah, let's not even talk about what was going on at Ole Miss back then. And so it is interesting to look at from Gus Malzahn's perspective to where you don't want to build this game up too much. You want to talk about this as another game you have to attack the same way, but there is a lot on the line. And I think that if Gus Malzahn wins this game, all of a sudden he finds himself in a really good spot as far as his job goes. But man, that's an uphill climb.
Well, to the point you're making, Auburn running back Kerryon Johnson, who's obviously had a sensational statistical year, he actually talked about that same point of, hey, everybody knows it's number 1, but you got to keep your emotions in check. Right. Here's what Johnson said about that this week.
Yeah, we haven't beat them in a while, so obviously that's what they're going to be preaching. That's what we're going to be preaching. But really, we've got to go in with this mindset the same way we do any other game. Obviously, it's a big one, but you can't overhype it in your brain, and you go out there and you start playing too fast and you make mistakes. So in my mind, we're going out, we're playing Georgia. Who cares about the rankings? Never looked at them and continue. Never I want in the future, so I'm going to go out there and play my ball.
So I got to ask you, because I feel like this is something that Georgia's been very good at
Right.
this year, not making too much of one game, not looking too far ahead, really focused on the task at hand. Can Auburn be just as good at that as Georgia is this year? And one of the reasons why I ask that is because, let's face it, Gus Malzahn has sort of tightened up in tough games as of late.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, if Gus Malzahn has done a good job of not making this a big deal to his players, maybe he should make it a little bit bigger of a deal to his players. If he hasn't won one of these top 15 games, going all the way back to the middle of 2014, maybe he should take a different approach. Maybe he should build it up a little more and make these players understand that a lot's on the line. It's been tough right now for Gus Malzahn to really catch this offense in stride. I think they have some good matchups, by the way. And I think it's a really good game to break down when you look up the matchups from Auburn's offense to Georgia's defense, because I think they're going to try to expose the secondary. I don't think Georgia hasn't done a great job of getting there with their front four, and Auburn's going to have a patchwork offensive line. And I think when you start to break this down, it is an extremely interesting game from an X's and O's standpoint. I'm just glad as an Alabama guy that Alabama's not involved in this game. They get to kind of sit back and watch.
Christopher White says a one running back team is not going to beat Georgia. Say what you want, but it's not happening. He's obviously referencing the injury to Cameron Petway here, but you are going to bring Cam Martin into this discussion.
Right.
Jarrett Stidham, I think, is having a sensational season. I think we're actually at the point now where Stidham's underrated. You know, some of y'all would have said before the start of the season he was overrated. I think at this point in the year, Stidham's underrated. People are not realizing the kind of numbers that he's putting up, including 3 touchdowns last week against Texas A&M. But do you agree with the point that the Petway injury here is a significant problem for Auburn, the kind of thing that would prevent it from beating Georgia?
Well, I think it could be. I actually don't think it's as big a deal this week against Georgia as it might have been in a couple other contests, because I think I think Auburn understands that you're going to have to go through the air if you're going to win this game. Obviously, you want to establish the running game and try to unload that box a little bit and back those Georgia linebackers off the line of scrimmage. But I think that Gus Malzahn knows that maybe the weakness of this Georgia team, if there is one, is going to be the secondary. And maybe that's where you do have the upper hand. Jarrett Stidham throwing to some of these wide receivers. Eli Stove has looked electric. Nate Craig Myers, a lot of these guys have looked electric in recent weeks. So I think that it probably doesn't become as big of a deal probably going into the Georgia game this weekend as a lot of people think.
We'll get Benjamin Wolk on this subject coming up in just a moment. Let me hit a few comments before we do. Lee Watson says the Mutts are going to lose to Auburn, Georgia Tech, Alabama in the SEC Championship game. They'll lose their bowl game, end up with 4 losses. Typical overrated Georgia, mediocre team playing in the weakest division of football. I'm going to guess that's probably not a Georgia fan right there. But it is true, at least in one respect, that, you know, for Georgia, who has worked its way to the #1 ranking right now, the real tests for Georgia, or a significant collection of tests, are still to come. Auburn on the road this week, that's a tough one. We'll talk more about that throughout our show. SEC Championship game either against Auburn or Alabama, also tough here. So while Georgia has, I think, validated itself with its #1 ranking through the way it's played through its first 9 games, there's still a lot more work for Georgia to be done here as well.
Yeah, listen, if you're talking about an overrated Georgia team, then you're not watching the same Georgia team I am. And listen, I don't have a dog in the fight. It's, you know, no pun intended. I've been watching Georgia all year. They're a very good football team. I think when you look at the overrated teams of Georgia in the past, look down to Miami right now. That's what you're seeing at Miami right now. A little bit overrated, a Miami team that's gone undefeated and is going to have to play Notre Dame this weekend. You're going to see what Miami and Mark Richt have this weekend. This is not the same Georgia team it was under Mark Richt. They really have proven to me that they belong in the #1 ranking.
Raymond Cox in the comment section says, why do you guys expect a high school coach, he's referencing Gus Malzahn, to win the SEC? And on that subject, let me remind you that AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless Direct TV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. And let me bring in Benjamin Wolk here, who covers Auburn and Auburn recruiting for SECCountry.com to answer that very question. It sounds like some folks are critical, including Raymond Cox here, of the job that Gus Malzahn has done at Auburn, Ben. So let me just lay this right at your feet to get our conversation started. How critical is this game for Malzahn in terms of proving that he's more than just a high school coach, to use the commenter's phrase, and prove that he still is the best leader for the Auburn program going forward?
There's no question that this is probably, I mean, obviously he's played in some SEC, he's played in an SEC championship game, he's played in a national championship game, but in terms of holding on to his job, there has never been a game in Gus Malzahn's career that has been more important than this one. Obviously losing 3 straight years to Alabama and Georgia both doesn't sit well, but with the state of Georgia's program over the last few seasons, it really doesn't sit well the way that Auburn has played against Georgia. I mean, I think that he can still salvage things even if Auburn were to lose to Georgia this weekend. Still got Alabama ahead on the schedule, but I think that this weekend against Georgia is going to be very indicative just of how things really are at Auburn right now, what the state of the program is, how talented this program really is right now. I mean, this is the best football team that Gus Malzahn has had since he's been at Auburn. Obviously, it's a little bit unfortunate for him just because of timing and having to win these games that Alabama and Georgia appear to be the two best teams in the country. But, I mean, if he can win this weekend, the entire narrative changes in terms of Gus Malzahn and how he's perceived by the Auburn fan base. If he loses, I think you hear a lot of the same things that you heard after the Clemson game and after the LSU game, and there comes a certain point when enough is enough, and that noise, there's nothing you can really do to stop that noise happening after every loss. So I mean, I think that this game might be, talking about the SEC championship and talking about the national championship from the 2013 season, I still think that this might be the most important game that Gus Malzahn's ever coached.
In our comment section, Ben, Corey Andrews is predicting Jarrett Stidham to have a big game on Saturday. I understand where that prediction comes from, especially after the way that Stidham played back in his home state of Texas against Texas A&M on Saturday. And I guess by way of a question, what I'll ask you is, at this point in the season, is Stidham with his arm just as dangerous as that potent Auburn running attack? We think about Gus Malzahn as mostly a running back-based offense, with Chip Lindsey as the offensive coordinator, with Stidham putting up big numbers. Is the passing game just as dangerous for Auburn right now?
Well, I think we're finally starting to see this balance that Gus Malzahn and Chip Lindsey have talked about all offseason. I think it's finally starting to get to that point where they do feel as confident throwing the football as they do running the football. No one's going to run the ball on Georgia. I mean, not to say that they won't be able to, have a little bit more success than maybe some other teams have, but Georgia's just, not the team that you're going to run the football on, especially when you've really only got one running back in Kerryon Johnson that you're confident in. If you look at Georgia's season, I mean, there's really only been, to my knowledge, and you would know better than me, Brandon, but, there's only been one time that I can think of where Georgia's defense even looked a little bit vulnerable, and that was in the first half against Missouri. Sure. When Matty Mock was really stretching the ball downfield. I mean, I think that Jarrett Stidham is, of all of the quarterbacks that Georgia's faced this year, I mean, I think that Jarrett Stidham has that downfield threat more than anyone else. I mean, I think that that's the way that Auburn is going to feel like they have to beat Georgia. They haven't had to rely solely on the passing game much this season because, Kerryon Johnson's been among the best in college football when it comes to rushing touchdowns, and Cameron Petway has had a few games when he was healthy where he was able to run the ball. So, I mean, I think this will be the first game of the season, really, where the onus is placed on Jarrett Stidham's shoulders. And obviously, I think that Auburn is much happier to have that now, 10 games into the season, as opposed to week 1 and 2 when, he was more or less just a freshman.
I agree with you. I think the way that Auburn's obviously going to try to attack is to throw downfield, but in order to do that, they have to have the guys blocking up front. And one of the biggest question marks has been some of the injuries you've seen from Auburn, obviously switching out some of the linemen on Saturday in that big game against A&M. Do you expect to see Mike Horton, Darius James in the game? What combination do you expect to see in that front five for Auburn this weekend?
I think that we just talked with Gus earlier, around noon, and it probably more than any coach in the SEC just doesn't tell you what his personnel is going to be like or anything like that. I would expect everyone to be relatively healthy. They talked a lot about it. Well, going back to the LSU loss, I think it's important to talk about the offensive line. We talk about the LSU loss because Chip Lindsey even admitted that when Casey Dunn went out, a couple other guys were banged up. He was hesitant there in that second half, and that a lot of his play calling was dictated because of his lack of confidence. Not necessarily lack of confidence in the players, but just the amount of shifting that Auburn had to do on the offensive line. It made him uncomfortable, and it affected his play calling. Obviously, over the last few weeks, Auburn has had so many different variations on the offensive line. I think that they're much more comfortable with whatever combination they end up going with, which I don't think that they really could have said that 3 or 4 weeks ago. But I think that Auburn's done a good job coming off that bye week of really trying to shore up health at every position, but on the offensive line especially. So I think that I think that they should be pretty pleased with where health is on the offensive line going into the Georgia week. Obviously, it's going to be a pretty physical game, though, and you want to stay healthy as well heading into Alabama in 2 weeks. So it's definitely something to track, Auburn's offensive line and how healthy they are.
Hey, Ben, great stuff. Thanks for your time here on AT&T SEC Country Live today. We love your Auburn coverage, including some really interesting stuff going on with recruiting, including a quarterback offer out to Jaron Williams that I know you've been writing a lot about. We'll look forward to catching up with you soon here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Read a bunch from it at SECCountry.com, and enjoy talking to you soon as well.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Good stuff there from Benjamin Wolf, covers Auburn recruiting for SECCountry.com.
He's one of the best, man. I always enjoy his interviews.
Ben does a great job. We'll roll on here. That I'm number 4 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Kind of an interesting scenario for LSU at quarterback moving forward after the loss to Alabama on Saturday. Myles Brennan got some time against Alabama last week, and that sort of led to some questions to Ed Orgeron this week of, does that mean that Brennan's now about to be your quarterback moving forward and you're kind of moving away from Danny Etling? Well, Orgeron kind of quieted that talk with what he said earlier this week.
We're going to play Danny, but if Danny doesn't do the things we want him to do, we'll play Myles, just in the last game. Danny's our starting quarterback, and Danny's done a good job for us. We're going to finish the season. Danny's our quarterback. Myles would have to beat Danny out on a play-by-play basis in practice. He'd have to play better than he would in a game. He hasn't done that yet. I would not give Myles a starting quarterback job just to get ready for next year. We got a lot of things to play for. We're thinking of one game at a time, and we want to have a very good year. For right now, Danny's our quarterback.
So he says Danny's our quarterback, but not the most ringing endorsement of Etling. And in fact, when Etling met with the media, you could sort of tell, at least I feel like I can tell, that he wasn't all that moved by his coach's confidence in him. Here's what Etling said about what Orgeron had to say.
It just sounds like a normal thing to me. So, yeah.
What are your thoughts on your play? Have you looked at this? What would you like to improve upon with these last 3 games?
Just taking advantage of opportunities when they're there and continue to make the right reads and trying to put the ball in the right spot and continue to keep getting better.
Shannon Burgess, who's a big LSU fan in our comment section, says, nah, Myles not close to being ready. Yeah. So what do you do here? I mean, it sort of feels like a lame duck season now. I mean, it does feel like you're sort of playing for next year, especially for a first-year head coach. You stick in with Etling, who may be a little bit better. You go with Brennan because maybe he's the future, although I'd like to think LSU can bring in a quarterback for the class of 2018 who's a better prospect than Brennan. I mean, is there a right answer here? I mean, how do you feel about this, especially as a guy who played the game and wants to be able to trust the quarterback that you got on the field?
Well, I also want to be able to trust my head coach and think that just because I'm a senior and I'm not going to be here next year, that I'm not going to get taken off the field. I think that LSU, and I would think that most fans kind of back me up in the comment section, LSU owes it to Danny Etling to let him start these last few games.
Really?
I feel that way. I think that he's given everything he could possibly do. He's played through some bad offenses. He's kind of turned the corner this year as far as Matt Canada goes, and he deserves the opportunity to play against Arkansas, Tennessee, and Texas A&M down the stretch. I think he's earned that right. And I think if you're going to look towards next season and start benching seniors because you think that maybe that'll make you better off next year, then I think you're looking in the wrong direction. I also think that probably hinders your ability to pick up grad transfers in the future, but that's probably a talk for another day. I just think it would be a bad look for Orgeron.
Esteban Esteta says, I'd like to see Lowell Narcisse play. He says that they're playing the wrong freshman right now. The other class 2017 quarterback, Lowell Narcisse, is the guy they ought to play. Mike Elkin says, keep Etling in until he gets hurt. So you're bringing up a pretty good point. And I understand where you're coming from that, hey, you want to be able to trust this guy.
Right.
But, I mean, how much more do you owe to Danny Etling? You've given him all these chances. And, the game for him was against Alabama on Saturday. And, I mean, he didn't really come through there. I mean, do you owe him more than that? Because you actually went back to him and you stuck with him through a lot this season when at one point in time they were already considering making quarterback changes. Not like you've done him wrong. You've given him lots of chances to play.
Well, but he's had a better year this year than he did last year. And I think he's made strides as a quarterback. And I do. I feel like you owe it to him. And I know that, he's had his ups and downs at LSU. And you've pointed to last season. And some people didn't expect him to actually be the starter when the season opened. We did talk about Lowell Narcisse and we did talk about some other guys that were getting reps in some of these scrimmages. But like I said, he's been a pretty good quarterback. When you look at his efficiency, when you look at the yards he's thrown for, he's in the top ranking of some of the SEC quarterbacks. Only 2 interceptions this year for Danny Etling. I think when you saw what Myles Brennan did in some of the other games this year, specifically against Syracuse, that kind of makes you guarded a little bit to put him in the game in these last 3 of the year.
Cliff Nelson says Lowell Narcisse, the other freshman quarterback we just mentioned, is going to push Brennan for the starting spot next year and is more of a dual threat that can run the full Canada offense. Maybe that's the case, but when it comes to Orgeron on this is where he sort of reeks as a first-year coach. And hear me out on this for a moment. He sort of strangely put Brennan in the Syracuse game and then had to pull him out. Then after that, sort of emphatically said that Danny Etling is our quarterback. Myles Brennan's not our guy. Danny Etling's our guy. Emphatically saying that. Now seems to be going back on that again.
Yeah.
This is one of those weird sort of like politician flip-flops where he's on both sides of this issue depending on what month of the season that we're in.
Yeah.
This is the most first-year coach issue for Orgeron. He comes across like a first-year coach with he's handling his quarterback because he continues to contradict himself. That's one of the areas in which he is not sort of fully taken on the mantle of being LSU coach yet.
Well, I feel like he probably took a page from the Joe Oliva book with the hiring of Les Miles and the firing of Les Miles, and maybe that's the direction he's kind of. I'm kidding. I just but the thing is about Ed Orgeron, he's not a first-time head coach. This is a guy who's been a head coach before at a couple of different places and has had to deal with these situations. I think that Ed Orgeron a lot of times just doesn't know what answer to give the media. I think that he kind of falls back on Danny Etling's our quarterback because he doesn't want to say maybe we are going to start this guy. Maybe he is going to get a few more reps down the stretch and start to prepare him for next year because that's when really it's the story is going to be told about Ed Orgeron at LSU. It's going to be next year, not this year. Next year when you really start to get a lot of your guys in place. I wouldn't be surprised to see Myles Brennan get a lot of snaps. Especially when you look at this possible game against Tennessee, which should not be close. I think that they'll beat Tennessee pretty handily. Maybe you get Myles Brennan at the end of that game. But I don't think you should start him by any means. I don't think that he needs to get in there and get all these snaps. I think that you kind of ease him into some of these situations. Maybe get a bunch of snaps in the bowl game moving forward. But listen, like I said, they owe it to Danny Etling to let Danny Etling play out his time as LSU starting quarterback. He's done a lot of work for that school.
Here's one of the things I'm going to be watching as the season comes to an end. We're in a moment in time now where a lot of quarterbacks are decommitting for the class 2018. I mentioned Jaron Williams a moment ago, currently a Kentucky commit. He's, I think, about to decommit from that program. He's either going to Ohio State. Auburn has recently offered him. That's a guy who's on the move. You saw James Foster recently decommit from Missouri. That's his home state. Could LSU get involved with a guy like that, a James Foster, someone that was committed to another SEC school who's just looking around for a better option? That's what LSU needs to do. It sounds like some LSU fans like Lowell Narcisse. It sounds like right now Ed Orgeron likes Myles Brennan, but neither one of those guys are obviously the guy. Otherwise, they'd be playing right now. LSU still needs to sign a big name for the class 2018, well, at least the biggest name they can.
And I'm with, I don't remember if you said it was Cliff Nelson or Shannon Burgess, but I am with you with the fact that I think Lowell Narcisse actually opens up the entire Matt Canada offense. I think that you're just seeing snippets of it right now and dealing with what Danny Etling gives you. And at some point, they will find a dual threat quarterback in recruiting. And Matt Canada, if he's not a head coach by the time this happens, Matt Canada will be able to open up his entire offense and do some special things with a dual threat quarterback. I don't think he has that option right now, so he has to kind of maneuver around. It is going to be interesting to see those two guys moving forward.
So my favorite thing of all, I like this more than the games. I love coaching rooms.
I know you do.
Can we do a coaching room?
Let's get it started.
Item number 5 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So Brent Zwerneman, a name that's not easy to say, but a guy that's been covering Texas A&M for a long time, goes on the Feinbaum show this week, and he lets it be known one of the names that he sees as a possibility for Texas A&M. Let me show you the tweet here from Feinbaum about what Zwerneman had to say about this. We'll put that on the screen for you to see it. Jimbo Fisher to Texas A&M, that's what Zwerneman suggests as a possibility there. Now, I got to tell you, I don't know that Zwerneman, or I should say that Jimbo goes to A&M, but this makes some sense. Jimbo's flirted with other jobs before. You see Brent Zwerneman talking about that the Aggies would be interested in Jimbo Fisher. This, to me, seems to make some sense. I'm not telling you it's going to happen, but the dots to connect on a rumor like this, you understand where it would come from. Jimbo maybe wishes he took the LSU job right about now. Florida State, the situation does not look too good. It seems like a foregone conclusion that someone's leaving Texas A&M. You need a big name. You need a big name recruiter. Jimbo would fit that bill. This would feel like a great hire for A&M and the kind of thing that could happen in some realm of reality.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. And I don't know if I like it from either way. I don't know if this is a good fit for Jimbo to go to Texas A&M where they really have struggled defensively under Kevin Sumlin. He's still an offensive coach, and his offensive play calling has been under fire while he's been at FSU. I don't know if I like it for Texas A&M either. When you look at what Jimbo Fisher's dealt with at Florida State this year, his allegiance to his assistant coaches has really gotten him in a lot of hot water. His players aren't playing hard. They've had injuries all over the field. The defense is a mess. The offensive line's a mess. So I don't know that I like it for Texas A&M either. I think that when Jimbo looks at last year and possibly could have gone to LSU, possibly could have even gone to Texas, he would have been on the coaching list for some of those jobs. Maybe he does kick himself in the butt, but I don't think he makes a reactionary move and heads to Texas A&M either. I think he rides out the storm at Florida State. I don't know if I like it for either one of them.
Jamie Bailey says Jimbo's trash. Please keep him out of the SEC, which, I don't want to go that far, but, I think that you and he both in the same category when I say that y'all are setting too high of a standard for what a good hire is.
Yeah.
There's not but enough guys to fit on one hand here who have won national championships in college football as it is. If you hire Jimbo Fisher, you've hit a grand slam home run. There is no saying, well, I think you could have done better than that. Who is better than Jimbo Fisher that you can hire? He's won a national championship. He's coached a Heisman Trophy. How many first-round draft pick quarterbacks has he cultivated? I think that Jimbo's one of the best names that you could hire. And, if you stick around Florida State long enough, maybe you eventually get fired. I mean, to me, I'm not telling you this is going to happen, but there are a lot of reasons why it maybe should happen.
No, and I agree with you. And I do think it's a big possibility that Jimbo tries to find his way out of Tallahassee. I'm not ready to call him a bad hire by any means, by anybody. I have questions about the Texas A&M job and the fit and whether he'd be able to recruit Texas and how that would really mix in with the problems they've had at that university. But Jimbo Fisher, you mentioned it. He's coached a national championship team. He has a Heisman Trophy winner. Anytime you have a guy like that in your head coaching slot, then at least they can fall back to say, when I get my players, when I get the right combination here because I've been there before. I think a lot of times when you hire head coaches, it's like, what can this guy do with a ton of talent? Can he recruit at that level? Jimbo Fisher has answered those questions at Florida State. It's staying there now and maybe getting a new location kind of offers him up a little bit more ability to kind of recruit with his second nature. I mean, I feel like he just needs time to move forward, I guess is what I'm saying.
Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, best coach in the state. Do you agree?
Oh.
Best coach in the state.
Maybe, yeah. It's hard to disagree with at this point in time. I'll tell you that.
So Jimmy Barnes, Jason Lucas, Brandon Pope, all mentioning the name Mike Bobo. I think Bobo's going to get a bigger job. He's at Colorado State right now. He's the former Georgia offensive coordinator. I think he needs to be back east, though, because he's got those great connections to the state of Georgia. Yeah. That's the spot he needs to recruit. That's obviously a problem for the other SEC schools if he's recruiting in the South, but that's kind of where he needs to be. Alan Barnes also says Fisher looks tired. I don't disagree with that right now. Let me move on to item number 6 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So a little bit of a provocative statement coming out of Starkville, Mississippi, or at least folks with some connections to Starkville. Brandon Walker does our SEC Country Mississippi State podcast, and as a build-up for the Mississippi State-Alabama game on Saturday, Walker, representing the Maroon and White here, says when he looks at Alabama, he doesn't see anything to be afraid of. Crimson Tide fans, can you believe a Mississippi State guy is saying this?
I know that Alabama is not a no. I know Alabama has been a national title contender for 10 years. I know Nick Saban has owned Dan Mullen. But I ain't scared. I don't see an unbeatable juggernaut. I don't see a team that is going to impose its will on Mississippi State. I don't see that. You can tell me I'm wrong. Alabama fans have done so already. But I don't see it.
What is going on here? What is this guy? Does he want to get his behind beat? Like, why is he saying this kind of stuff? Now, I'm not saying that this is going to turn into bulletin board material for Alabama here, but if you're a Mississippi State fan, is this what you want your Mississippi State podcast host saying? Leading the game with the Crimson Tide, bring them on? Maybe you do like the fight that's being shown here. Alabama fans can't be too happy about that.
I know he said he already heard from Alabama fans. That's because I quote tweeted him on Twitter and made sure that all the Alabama fans did know what Brandon Walker was saying. And he was none too pleased with me that I invited my Alabama friends to kind of clap back at him about what he was saying. Listen, to some degree, I actually agree with Brandon Walker that Mississippi State shouldn't be scared. And Brandon Walker said on Twitter that he thinks that maybe this is one of the weaker teams. Now, it could be Alabama's weakest team in 10 years, like he said, and still be a national championship contender. But he thinks that this is one of Nick Saban's weaker squads over the last 10 years. And I think when you look at the injuries, when you look at the passing game, when you look at the inability of the offensive line really to impose their will against LSU last week, I think he can make an argument for that. I don't think Mississippi State should be scared at all. I think that when Mississippi State takes the field, they're as good a team as you're going to find right now in the SEC under Auburn, Georgia, and Alabama. What I will point to, though, is what Mississippi State did look like against Auburn and did look like against Georgia. And I think that Alabama's going to be able to do a lot of those same things.
A lot of comments coming in on this. Mike Elkin says, totally agrees with Brandon. They're not going to win the national championship. Stephen Early says, this is always a disaster. Poke the bull and get rolled. Fred Breadhorse says that Mississippi State's going to beat, or I should say Breedhorse maybe, says Mississippi State's going to beat Alabama. He's picking the upset. Sean Burkhead said that's like picking a fight with Brock Lesnar. It's not smart. Michael Collins says Mississippi State barely beat UMass. Come on. It's going to be another Vanderbilt. Maybe he is a little bit like the Vandy player who said, bring that on. But I sort of agree with some people in the comment section said, we kind of grade Mississippi State on a curve because we feel like they're less talented than the other SEC teams. It's sort of special what Dan Mullen does every year. But how about you play consistent from week to week? Is that so much to ask? Yep. You got drilled by Georgia, drilled by Auburn, barely beat UMass. Yes, played way above your head and handling LSU earlier in the season, and a nice win against Texas A&M. So there are plenty of really good moments. But how about some consistency? I mean, that's the one thing I want to judge Dan Mullen on a little bit more. Not can you rise up and get good wins. Not can you avoid finishing the cellar in the SEC West. but can you just play with a measure of consistency from week to week? I sort of need that from Mississippi State at this point in time.
Yeah, and that's my problem, really. Like I said, I kind of agree with Brandon Walker in some of his arguments. I don't think you should be scared if you're Mississippi State. I think you've beat some good teams this year. I mean, you beat LSU by 30, and they have more talent than you as well when you look at that game and that matchup. But I do think that there is something to be said about the consistency under Dan Mullen, to where you do get blown out in a couple of those games against the better teams in the SEC. I look at the game last year, and I thought that Nick Fitzgerald and company might have a fighting chance against Alabama. 51-3, they lost that game last year by 48 points. And so until Dan Mullen gets within the ballpark of Alabama and his tenure there and what Nick Saban's been able to do defensively, I don't know that I'm ready to say it's an upset. I think that Brandon Walker is on the right road when he says that this is our best chance.
Yeah.
But I still don't know if it's a good chance.
Elizabeth Bradford says we don't bury the scared, we bury the dead. Roll Tide, roll. I don't even know what that means. That's horrifying to think about.
Yeah, I don't know. Halloween's over. I don't know.
Brandon Walker got her fired up and ready to go. Jake Thomas says Mississippi State's going to play Bama tough. Not sure they will win, but it's going to give Alabama a good fight and potentially a good win for Alabama, which goes back to what we started the show with, is that Alabama needs to collect these nice wins. They haven't gotten a lot this season. They don't have a road win at Notre Dame the way that Georgia does. Mississippi State is at least good enough to provide that. Good enough to keep it close with Alabama? I'm not ready to say that as of yet, but good enough to give Alabama a resume-enhancing win.
Well, and I will go back to something you asked me last week before Alabama played LSU and before Georgia played South Carolina. We talked about both of these teams. Do they need to win big? I said neither one of them need to win big. Matter of fact, they didn't even need to win. Their goals would all still be ahead of them. But I think that if, as an Alabama fan, when I really look at what I saw last week against LSU, I would like to see Alabama be able to impose their will on Mississippi State this weekend. I think that that's something you need to see as an Alabama fan moving forward. You didn't get it done last week against LSU. LSU won the statistical categories all over the field. I think that if you're really going to compete for a national title at Alabama this year with some of the injuries you've had, I would love to see Alabama win this game by 3 touchdowns and really impose their will on Mississippi State's defense.
That is Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American. My name is Brandon Adams. This is AT&T's SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. Let's move on and get back to the Georgia-Auburn game here for a moment without a number 7 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I pulled a little bit of audio that appeared on SportsCenter this week of Doug Kazurian, a gambling expert, talking about a bit of a divide that exists right now between bettors when it comes to Georgia and Auburn. Not who's going to win the game, but who should even be favored. Does the debate here from Las Vegas give us any insight into the game this weekend? We'll take a listen. Let's try to decide.
There seems to be a divide amongst odds makers about who should be favored, Georgia at Auburn.
Yeah.
Last week, as we know, we've talked about in the past, Westgate does look-ahead lines or games of the year. Auburn was a 2.5-point favorite a week ago. Both take care of business this past weekend, but the Wynn Hotel opened up Georgia as a 2.5-point favorite. I talked to the head odds maker at the Westgate. He still thinks Auburn should be favored by about a field goal, so it's surprising that Georgia is now favored on the road this weekend at Auburn. So, 2.5 to 2.5, not a huge difference, but there seems to be a divide right now amongst odds makers about who should be favored.
So I feel like I have a complete handle on what's going on here. We actually talked about this briefly on the show yesterday, and we actually spent some more time talking about this off the air. If you go back to the summer, and those of you that have been with us since the beginning of our show, we talked about this a lot during the summer.
Yep.
When the initial point spreads came out in Las Vegas, the very first casino to release any, Georgia was a point spread underdog in 4 games. The Notre Dame game, the Tennessee game, the Florida game, and the Auburn game. That's what Vegas thought Georgia was going to be before the start of the season. As it has turned out, Georgia is way better than the initial prognostication was. So much so that when the initial point spread was released for Tennessee-Georgia this year, Tennessee was no longer a favorite, but Georgia's only a 3.5-point favorite. As soon as the line became available to bet on, Georgia got bet up way big to like a double-digit favorite. Same thing here, where before the start of the season, bettors and odds makers thought Auburn was going to be the better of the two teams, deserving of being a point spread favorite here. And it's just hard to change your mind that quickly over the course of just a few weeks. But Georgia's playing well enough right now that people have had to rethink what they thought they knew before the season started.
I told you before the show, I think one of the funniest parts when I look at this is that this has become an argument point for Auburn fans and Georgia fans. It's like, no, I'm favored by 2 points. No, I'm favored. No, you're a 2-point underdog. It's like, this is 2 points. We're talking about 2 points in a football game that really, as both of these teams know, can come down to the wire and can end on a tip pass like it did a few years ago. I would favor Georgia in this game, and it's not by a ton, but I think it's by about 3 points, which is actually where the spread is sitting right now. I think that they probably have this thing lined up now because all the money started to flow in and it started to move towards Georgia, and I think everybody expects Georgia to probably win this game.
I think, though, the important thing to remember here is is that Auburn, I believe, is a real living, breathing team.
Yeah.
I think getting some love and some respect from Vegas, whether you want to make them a short, slight favorite or just close with Georgia by virtue of playing the game in Jordan-Hare Stadium, whatever reason you want to come up with, I do think Jarrett Stidham's having a really good year at quarterback. We talked to Ben Wolk about that a moment ago. I still think the running game is formidable. I don't like the way that Gus Malzahn manages this team, but he may have enough talent to sort of supersede his mismanagement of the roster here. I think Kevin Steele's doing a great job with the Auburn defense.
Yes.
I think if you're a Georgia fan, you got to understand where this respect for Auburn's coming from. Auburn is good. A loss at Clemson, the defending national champion. A loss at LSU, a team that's still pretty good here. And those
both
are the only,
Death Valleys.
Yeah, both the Death Valleys. Those are the only blemishes here for Auburn. This is a team that's still alive for the college football playoff. I think Georgia fans need to respect the respect that Auburn is getting from Vegas.
Yeah, and listen, I understand it either way. If you think Auburn's going to win, I can see your point. If you think Georgia's going to win, I can see your point. I think that's the reason it needs to be played out on the field. Georgia is very underestimated on defense. It's like you just brought up. What Kevin Steele has done with that D, that linebacking core, Jeff Holland coming off the edge, Marlon Davidson, they have good players. They are going to be able to clog up the run probably better than most teams Georgia has seen this year. And so I think that if they can get Georgia off balance in those third and longs and be able to unleash some of those pass rushers up front, maybe they do catch Georgia in a couple situations, and maybe they can pick off a couple of balls from Jake Fromm. I'm going to have to see it to believe it, but that's kind of what the thought goes into this game when you talk about the point spread and who's going to be favored. That's the situation that you're talking about.
So I make my case that Georgia fans ought to respect Auburn here on Saturday. Take Vegas at its word. Mike Elkin's response: UGA by 28.
Yeah.
Listen,
I don't know.
Maybe it is that simple for Georgia this year. Maybe they are just on that much of a roll. But this is the best team Georgia's played since Notre Dame, and that's not even true. That's true by a long shot.
Yeah, listen, now when you talk about the amount of points that Auburn has been able to put up when their offense is clicking, now I think it is concerning that Kerryon Johnson is going to be really the only game-changing back with Cam Petway injured, and I think you look at that offensive line and maybe there's some questions about that, but we've talked about it before. If you can ask one question about a position group at Georgia right now, it's the secondary, and that's exactly what Auburn's going to be able to attack and exploit if they can get the protection up front. I think it's going to be a great game. We're going to talk about it for the rest of the week. I'm so excited to see these two teams face off.
Maurice Carter says, BA, Georgia's not going to lose. I tell you that every week, LOL. I'm not saying they're going to lose. I'm just saying that Auburn's a team worth respecting.
Yes.
I like what Willie Gray says, though. He says Gus is going to be the third coach to be gone due to the Kirby Smart effect. McElwain going to be out at Florida. Is out at Florida. Butch Jones on his way out to Tennessee. Does Gus Malzahn fall prey to the Kirby Smart effect after Saturday as well? That's a fair question.
I would say that Butch Jones had nothing to do with Kirby Smart, and that Butch Jones has been gone long before they got to eat up Tennessee. I mean, that one's I've been calling that one since March. That guy's on his way out of town, but it's possible. And, I think that you're obviously going to give him the chance to go and play in the Iron Bowl and beat Alabama as well, and maybe the combination of those two sees its way out of town. I'm not sure.
All right, item number 8 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So I saw something on SECCountry.com today that I did not expect to see, but it wasn't from one of our SEC Country writers. It was actually what was written in response to our SEC Country writers. So Ryan Young had a piece about Chip Kelly and the pros and cons of Kelly becoming the next Florida coach. This is made relevant by the fact that Kirk Herbstreit on College Game Day this week talked about Kelly as being one of the favorites to get the Florida job. But you see all those comments there in the comment section at SECCountry.com? That's like 8 or 9 this morning when I was reading it, and almost all of them universally had the same viewpoint. They didn't want to see Chip Kelly get the Florida job. Now, there's some really good reasons why you might not want Kelly, but what surprised me about this is that it seems like fans, no matter what fan base you're talking about, almost always favor the biggest name for a job.
Right.
Chip Kelly would seem to be the biggest name that Florida could potentially hire. Are you surprised, at least on the basis of this vote, anecdotally from a few fans in the comment section, it was almost universal that they did not want Kelly to get the Florida job?
I'm not shocked at all, actually. And I think when you look at Chip Kelly, first of all, there's another layer to this where I think Florida, and we talked about it yesterday, there's probably a little bit of a culture problem when you talk about some of their players down there. Chip Kelly had his own issues at Oregon before he left, and they had to go under NCAA sanctions and all that fallout. And there's an added layer to it in the rules now where some of the people in the administration have to kind of put themselves on the line if they're going to hire somebody that previously had NCAA violations. So I don't know if they want to mix all that up in the Florida program with all the problems they've already had with a lot of their players, having felonies on their record now, and a lot of the guys getting suspended moving into the season. I don't know if that's a good matchup. And I think also when you look at Chip Kelly, as far as the SEC goes, I think he'd be a good mid-level SEC coach. But I don't know in the long run that Chip Kelly succeeds to the level that you want him to in the SEC. I think you saw a lot when Oregon played Auburn in the national championship game. Oregon was lighting up the scoreboards. The speed was too much for people. Yeah. He's hiking the ball every 10 seconds. I think they scored 1 touchdown against Auburn in that national championship game. And so I think when you look at Chip Kelly's offense, how lean his offensive line has to be, what his quarterback has to do, facing those Pac-12 defenses before. I don't know that he matches up real well in the SEC. I don't know that he beats Kirby Smart's defense on a consistent basis. I don't know that he beats some of the other defenses you're going to see. Yeah. So I understand it. When you ask questions about what Chip Kelly would possibly be at Florida, there are a couple of things that point in the opposite direction for him.
Keith Lindsay says Florida should try to get Bob Stoops. I think that's an interesting name. I'm surprised you're not hearing it more. But to go back to your point about Chip Kelly, listen, I'm a big believer that 90% of college football is recruiting. And it may be 99%. I just think it's the lion's share of what wins games in college football. And Chip Kelly did okay recruiting-wise at Oregon, but he's the kind of coach you hire if you can't recruit. Because some programs just simply can't win recruiting battles head-to-head against the real behemoths. Florida ought to be one of the behemoths. It ought to be a place where you can recruit. Now, for whatever reason, McElwain didn't, or at least couldn't, but it ought to be a place where you can. That's not the school that ought to be hiring Chip Kelly. One of the SEC schools to consider, Kelly, ought to be one of these schools that needs the help from some sort of gimmick offense because they can't bring in the 4- and 5-star players. Florida needs to hire the best recruiter it can find. If they do that, Florida's going to be fine. But you can't bring in a guy like Chip Kelly, who NFL teams accused of being a little weird after your last coach was also a little weird. I mean, let's just be honest here.
No, I agree with you. Listen, when you look at Chip Kelly as a recruiter, I agree with you. This is one of those coaches I think you hire if maybe you can't recruit right now to the level of everybody you're playing. It's a little bit of a smoke and mirrors. It kind of gets the Mike Leach kind of approach, where he's at Texas Tech and he's playing some of these teams and these Big 12 defenses and he can kind of light it up, and he goes to Pac-12 and he's playing Pac-12 defenses, and he does good at smaller schools because he can kind of coach his guys into a situation where they can be great offensively when probably they wouldn't have been before with their other coaches. I think hiring Chip Kelly at Florida right now, to me, signals a little bit of, hey, you know what, we are back in the league. Maybe we aren't the program we thought we were. I don't agree with him going there because, like you said, that guy, they should be able to find somebody that can recruit at a higher level and bring in prospects right there along with Alabama and Georgia. And so I think that if you bring in Chip Kelly, it is a little bit of a step back.
Jeremy Pettis says Chip Kelly needs Nike and their 100 different uniforms at Oregon to bring in the players. And it is true that he benefited from that Nike pipeline that was there a little bit. It's sort of interesting that it seems like his stock is falling. He's never going to be an NFL coach again. I mean, he may want to be. He's never going to be. And it seems like some of the major SEC programs aren't all that interested really either. And look, the show cause thing expired. I mean, it would be a formality to get him hired again. I don't believe that's the reason why you don't bring him in. His show cause is expired. I mean, that to me is not that big of an issue. It just seems like a lot of programs want to go a different direction.
I just think the administration having to attach their name to him, and I think I can't remember what exactly you had to do if you want to hire a guy like that has had problems in the past. I think you have to call Greg Sankey. I think you have to call Mark Emmert, the guy that heads up the NCAA. And I don't think the administration wants to attach their name to that because once he gets in trouble, that spells that you're gone too. And I think that if you have a guy on the fence and two guys that are kind of similar standard when you talk about head coaches, you go with the guy that hasn't had problems. So I understand that, especially coming from people at Florida right now that have had all those issues for the past couple of years.
Daniel Beard, a big Georgia fan, that says it doesn't matter who Florida hires, he's going to be fired another 3 years anyway. So Georgia fans feeling pretty good about the state of that rivalry right now. We'll see where that goes. Yeah. Item number 9, our AT&T SEC Country Life 1st and 10 list. So we touched on this a little bit yesterday, and it's actually been kind of an ongoing storyline on our show now, dating back to last week. You were angered at the thought that Butch Jones might burn Will McBride's redshirt, the backup quarterback, for even a brief period of time, based on an injury to Jerry Garantano. Well, lo and behold, that actually happened in the game on Saturday. McBride got in. Now, he ended up playing enough to make 8 pass attempts, but nonetheless, it was still just a brief window of time, and we don't know how much he's going to play going into the future. And McBride's mom had kind of some interesting tweets about this, and for the life of me, I can't tell what she means by this. Here's McBride's mom saying, "Seriously, I am not speechless. I'm screaming my head off." That's one of her tweets, but she had another tweet at one point where she said, "I am speechless." This is her first tweet. McBride goes in the game, she's speechless. Does she mean that she's so excited for her son to be playing big-time college football or so angry because he got his red shirt burned 3/4 of the way through the year?
I would guess, knowing my mom and knowing moms in general, that she's just excited that he's on the field. Maybe she doesn't look at this from the angle of, man, he's burning a red shirt. I think that maybe if you talk to his dad or one of his high school coaches, maybe they're speechless because they're angry about it.
Yeah.
But I think from the mom's perspective, you look at it and say, man, I never thought I'd see my son out here in the SEC game wearing the orange and going against some of these other teams. I think she's just really, really excited. Now, should she be? I don't know. That's a conversation for another day. But I think she's just really speechless because she's excited.
Well, in the first tweet we showed you was the one where she said, "I'm not speechless. I'm screaming my head off." She clarified her statement. I'm guessing there had to be something in the responses to her tweet that made her know that she had to clarify this, because clearly I'm sure she was getting some questions about Are you okay with this red shirt being burned there, which is a real thing to think about?
Oh, it's definitely a real thing to think about. And you know, you play him 3 plays in the first half. Jared Garantano comes in right before halftime. And then you give him 8 pass attempts in the second half. By the way, he was 1 of 8. So, I mean, I don't even know if the guy was ready to get on the field. When you talk about going up against some of the defenses they're playing, this is Southern Miss, though. So, I mean, he's 1 of 8 against Southern Miss. I think that tells the tale there. But I would be angry if I were her. And, I told you that last show, and I talked about it yesterday, that this, to me, is a complete debacle from Butch Jones. There's plenty of other guys on that roster that can take snaps against Southern Miss 3/4 of the way into the season other than Will McBride to burn a red shirt. That's just not the option you have to take. I think that Butch Jones understands his job is on the line, understands he has to win that game in order to possibly keep his head above water. I just think it's a bad look. I think it's a terrible look for Butch Jones.
David Melton says Jones already addressed this. She was excited he was in the game and happened during a family birthday party. The truth is, I believe that Butch Jones is a proven liar. He said earlier this year that Shai Tuttle injured himself by falling on a helmet. No one believes that's true, so I'm not going to take Butch Jones' word on how he feels like one of his parents feels about the quarterback situation. I'm not going to take Butch Jones' word on that.
I'm not going to take Butch Jones' word for anything after this. I've called for Butch Jones' job, but I've never really been down on Butch Jones as a person until this instant. This to me is I'm telling you right now, and I was telling Brandon this yesterday off the air. When you look at these situations, this is a home non-conference game. There's probably 120 guys dressed out on that sideline. You have somebody else over there. There's probably 7 quarterbacks on the roster, a ton of them walk-ons. You have somebody else over there that can take this snap other than Will McBride to burn his red shirt and take a year off his college experience. It just, I can't say it enough. This is a slap in the face from Butch Jones and Will McBride. I'm sure he brought him into his office, and I'm sure Will McBride was like, man, I'd love to play this weekend, but that shouldn't be a decision he has to make.
AT&T is a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch to AT&T Wireless and DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. Let's move on to item number 10 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So I think that Mississippi State's got a pretty cool alternate uniform here, and I think they're doing it for a really good reason, to honor our military men and women who are serving overseas and putting themselves in harm's way. There's just one question I have after seeing this video of the alternate uniforms that Mississippi State's wearing to honor our U.S. military here. Watch the video and see if you can help me out with this. Take a look. Cool video. I think it's a cool uniform. It's done to honor the military. But what exactly on the uniform honors the military?
I'm not sure. I'm looking at
that part.
I think there's stars and stripes in the numbers or something like that. I'm trying to look at it too.
Isn't it just maroon and silver, which is essentially what they wear all the time anyway?
It looks maroon and silver to me.
Now, I love the idea of honoring the military. I think it's a cool uniform. But when I heard it was going to be this, hey, we're going to honor the military, I thought they were going to have like the stars and stripes, the red, white, and blue. I thought that's what they were doing. This just sort of feels, I don't know. I don't even know what. I'm also colorblind, so maybe this is lost.
Yeah, right. Same. And listen, I think it kind of pales in comparison. When you look at last week, what Arizona State did, I don't know if you saw those uniforms where they had the Pat Tillman tribute and they're wearing like the. I mean, I thought that looked incredible. And now I'm looking at Mississippi State, and I love, like I said, I love the fact that this is a tribute to the military, but I'm not sure they went far enough in tributing to the military.
Esteban Estevez says, I was going to ask the same thing too about those uniforms. Like when you see Army and Navy play each other, I mean, like they wear the alternate uniforms for those games.
Yes.
Like those look like military tributes.
Oh my God.
Army's got the fatigues on.
They got the battleships like painted on their helmets.
The ones that Navy's been wearing the last couple of years, I think, are incredible uniforms. I don't know that all midshipmen love them. I've heard from some who don't, but I think it's an awesome uniform. This does not really feel military enough for me.
Like I said, I think it's all in the numbers. We have a couple of comments on here, military camo in the numbers and stuff like that. I don't know if you're going to call it military appreciation, though. If you don't go a little bit farther than that, maybe put a flag in the M on here. I don't know. But, I'm with you. It kind of comes up short for me.
All right, we got a funny champion of life. We'll do that to close out our show in just a moment. Before that, though, as I told you, AT&T, proud sponsor of SEC Country Live, AT&T, entertainment your way. And let's do our AT&T look ahead here. And a reminder that 7 p.m. tonight on ESPN, that college football playoff selection show comes back on again. We'll have a renewed top 25. My guess is pretty close to the same in the top 4. I expect Georgia at 1, Bama at 2. I assume Notre Dame stays at 3. I don't think Clemson changes from number 4. Do you see an undefeated Miami leap up, though, on the basis of its win against Virginia Tech on Saturday?
I think you'd see Miami take a leap ahead of a bunch of teams, probably even TCU. I wouldn't be shocked to see Miami sitting there at 6. I think Wisconsin makes a big jump as well. They're going to jump up to 7 or 8 because the path is clear for them, and they are undefeated as well. So I don't think we'll see any changing in the top probably 4 or 5, but in the back end of that top 10, I expect there to be a bunch of switch-arounds.
And I also think Auburn's solidly in the top 10 when these rankings are done here tonight. By the way, we'll be back on the SEC Country Facebook page later on tonight. Mike and I doing a special Path to the Playoff brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors as we look at exactly where these rankings are. So right here where you are right now on the SEC Country Facebook page, we'll be back tonight. Of course, before we get to any of that, though, it is time to close with the show the way we do each and every day. Much like Tennessee coach Butch Jones looking for champions of life, we're looking for him here on AT&T SEC Country Live as well. And once again, it's Washington State coach Mike Leach, who was asked about his thoughts on college football mascots, and, well, things got a little weird. Take a look.
Okay, let me think here. Well, first of all, there should be more sharks if you're by an ocean. That tiger at LSU that's a live, real tiger sitting in there in some metal structure, which clearly he could rip his way out of if he wanted to, even half wanted to. That's an awesome one. The buffalo at Colorado, that's an awesome one. There's a place in Kansas called Pitt State, and I used to see it on film. We didn't play them. Called Pitt State, and they're the gorillas. And there should be a lot more gorillas for mascots.
So listen, he goes on and on, but how can you dispute that logic? There should be more gorillas and more sharks. I actually think that's pretty fun.
I know exactly what school he's talking about, Pittsburgh State, without the H on the end of Pittsburgh, and I think they were the champions of Division III a couple of years ago. But that is cool. I love anything Mike Leach is saying in these pressers. I mean, he talked a couple of weeks ago about the best party he's ever been to, pointing at Florida-Bama down on the Gulf Coast. Man, this guy is awesome at some of these things. But
doesn't he sort of sound and look like the guy that's just sort of mumbling him himself in a subway station? There ought to be more gorillas, there ought to be more sharks.
No, yes, he does.
One of those guys.
Yeah, he sounds like he has a screw loose, but that's what I love about him. I mean, he's so candid up there. He's just basically talking to himself for like 20 minutes.
You think that would work in the SEC?
Depends on what school. I think that you got to pick and choose what school is going to put up with that guy in front of the podium. I don't know if you put him at a place like Florida, but I think some of the other tier schools that would love him.
That's an act that wears thin pretty quick, although it's kind of fun to see out there in Pullman, Washington. That's Mike Johnson. I'm Brandon Adams. Thanks for being with us here today on AT&T SEC Country Life. As I said, we'll see you tonight, 7 p.m. for Academy Sports and Outdoors presentation of the Path to the Playoff. We'll look at all the SEC teams, where they're ranked. Also, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Share this show with your friends on Facebook. Let them know we're talking about the SEC each and every day here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you again tomorrow.